Okay, we got it. All right. So today we're going to go through some announcements that will just take a few minutes, then we'll have our discussion and Jeff will be our presenter and we'll wrap up taking about 5 minutes to point you all in the direction of where the recording will be. So a few announcements. I hope everyone is receiving the e-news blast from John. If you are subscribing to this listserv for the Extension Master Gardener Coordinators, you'll receive his e-blast, and he usually sends that out each month. It has information about upcoming conferences, presentations, webinars, and just general training for Extension Master Gardener Coordinators and sometimes for volunteers. So please subscribe to that. For our upcoming presentations, next month we have Sherry joining us again, and Sherry is going to speak to us about motivations of Master Gardener volunteers. This is something that I think is really important because if we can figure out why people volunteer, perhaps we can figure out ways to keep them engaged and motivated and increase our retention. I just want to remind folks as you're coming on the call to please mute your phone. All right, I'm going to go ahead and mute a couple of lines real quick. Okay. All right, and then in July, Charlotte will speak to us about volunteer retention, so that will come right after Sherry's discussion about why volunteers are motivated. And then in August, Anne Yasalonis will speak to us about how to create a visioning session so that you can plan for future Master Gardener training and priorities. And in her process, she started a visioning session to get feedback from the volunteers. She sent out surveys, and I'm sure she's going to share those survey instruments with us. And then she took time to evaluate the results and then explain that to her stakeholders and the volunteers to improve their overall program. So that'll be an interesting webinar, and if you've never done a visioning session, she'll give you the steps in order to do that. All right, so if you all could take a moment to let us know what state you're from. We're always curious to find out where people are joining us from. So please go ahead and type your state in the chat box. And we have a good representation of people from all over the country. We have folks from Nebraska and Oregon. Kentucky is here, Georgia, New York. We have Florida, Pennsylvania, Vermont, Arizona, Maine, Maryland, Virginia, and California, and Oregon. Terry from Nebraska, Connecticut, Alabama, great, and Montana. So thank you all for joining us. And without further ado, we're going to go ahead and turn it over to Jeff. And Jeff Choate will speak about paid non-volunteer horticultural proficiency option to accompany Master Gardener training.
Thank you, Nicole. So as the title says, we're going to talk about not so much the focus of the MG training as much as an option that we've added to it in Lane County, Oregon. Keep in mind that the focus of the program will always be the MG training. This is a supplement, so we're not trying to do away with MG training and replace it with something else, but rather take advantage of the fact that we have this wonderful opportunity with a great diversity of classes and instructors to reach out to some other audiences. A little bit about myself. I actually joined the Master Gardener program in my county 20 years ago. It was 1998, and I was at the time working in a horticultural job down in Southern Oregon and was really looking for additional information on pest identification, weeds, insects, diseases. And so a year later, in 1999, I was able to actually go to work for the Extension Service to a county down south of us in Douglas County, but didn't have the master's degree, so went back and got that and ended up in the private sector for a long time, and I'll mention more about that shortly. But after 20 years, my predecessor finally retired, and I jumped at the opportunity to join Extension in Lane County. So with that, I'm just going to give a quick outline, I think. Make sure this responds to my keyboard. Nicole, we're back to that point where it's not doing what I'm telling it to.
Okay, let me take a look real quick. All right, you should be able to navigate through it.
Okay, well, if
All
that
right.
was me, then we're in good shape. Okay,
We're good.
so brief outline here. I'll give you a quick overview of the structure of our program in Lane County for the Master Gardeners, and then a brief history of the Horticultural Proficiency option, because it definitely precedes me. I think that came in around 2005. When I joined Extension here in Lane County, it was last year, March 1st, and so 2017 was already just about wrapped up for our training cycle, but we put our eye to the 2018 and came up with some ideas for changes, and I'll talk about those. We'll take a look at how that resulted in some participation in 2018 that I think is pretty pleasing to me, and then finally talk about some lessons learned along the way and some plans for what we might do differently in 2019. Well, this is once again lagging a little bit. I'm not able to make it advance. Nicole, do you want to see if you can push that forward? Okay, I might just lean on you to advance the slides here. So this is you might recognize this picture as the narrow little border between California to the south and Washington to the north. Lane County, Oregon is about the middle of the state, north to south, and we have the Willamette Valley, which runs from, if you can see my mouse on the screen, Portland is up around the northern end of the Willamette Valley in Oregon, and we're located at the southern end of the Willamette Valley. So we have a population of about 375,000, according to the current U.S. Census estimates. And we happen to be home to that other Pac-12 university here in Lane County, that University of Oregon. I should note, for those of you outside of the state, that Oregon State University is the one I'm working for. But that's where we're located, and we do have one major kind of metropolitan area in the center, Eugene, Oregon. Little background. Nicole, can you advance that for me, please?
Sure, hold on. There you go.
Thank you. Not sure what's happened, but thank you. So our Master Gardener program was established just a few years after the original program up in Washington. And so in 1976 was the first class. I should note that we still have a member of the class of 76 active in our Master Gardener program. And so we have, as far as I know, from the very beginning, it's been 11 weeks of classes with 2 topics per week, and currently we run those all day Wednesday from 9 to 4, and that amounts to 66 hours of training. And I'll call your attention to the fact that that number includes an introduction on the first morning of the first week, and then a field trip on the end of the last week. So when we're looking at classroom time, that's about 60 hours. And pardon me, Nicole. There, thank you. The Horticultural Proficiency option was actually initiated by my predecessor a little over 10 years ago, and it was really an opportunity to allow other people to come join the program, in particular professionals who worked all day and couldn't break away from their jobs. Maybe they were able to get away for the training, but then weren't able to volunteer. But they had a vested interest in the program content, and in some cases, these were underrepresented groups. I know from my perspective, and perhaps you all can relate to this, Extension has not always been able to break into the landscaper crowd, or nurseries and retail. Maybe we're a resource for some, and maybe others don't know we exist. And with high turnover in some of those professions, it can be difficult to establish that connection. So that was a goal, and it also brought in some additional funding on the side. Okay, next slide, please. So 2 options exist. We currently have the ability for someone to just kind of cherry pick classes out of our schedule and say, hey, I want to attend this one or these several, and they can pay $25 per class, and that we actually got a number of people that attended. You'll see some of those numbers coming up later. And the other option is, if someone wants to attend all of the classes, they can save about $50, and when completed, then they receive a certificate of completion for the course, and that might be beneficial to some of their employers. So I can't speak to that directly, but I know certain people have wanted to be able to show that for job purposes. Next slide, please. What I can say is up until this current year, the participation in the Hort Proficiency program, I've followed it very closely, but it's been just a few people here and there, not really high numbers. And I would say that probably the vast majority of folks that attended were from my previous employer. I worked for a local home improvement company that had 2 stores, and we typically sent 1 person from each store each year on average. And so that was probably the majority of folks attending. So when I rejoined Extension here in spring of last year, basically we made a decision to really push this program and see if we could reach these audiences. And the goal was either we reach them and we're successful, or we don't reach them and we back off and leave this on the back burner and let people attend via this method if they want to or not. But I'm pleased to share here very shortly what the numbers look like. Next slide, please. So as we made that push, my first step was to really thoroughly review the list of courses that we were offering and try to make sure that they really covered the fundamental topics that we needed to cover for a broad horticultural perspective. This is the actual calendar of topics that we used this year, and I will qualify that by saying, and for any of you who have been doing this for more than about a year, you probably well know that you have this grand idea of the perfect order that you want these classes to flow in. But bottom line is instructor availability dictates, you know, when you end up scheduling some things. For example, and by the way, I see in the chat box someone asked me about costs. I will be sharing that information very shortly. So the plant pathology and plant problem diagnosis, for example, I had not anticipated that we would be able to get our statewide plant pathology specialist to participate for a full day of training. And so when that became known to me, we bent over backwards to find a full day that we could accommodate, and we had to rearrange things. So numerous things with the schedule, but you can see the topics that we included, and that was a big part to reaching out to the professional audiences to make sure that we were providing something that they would benefit from as well. And we certainly didn't sacrifice anything on the home master gardener audience, because these are fundamental concepts for them as well. Next slide, please. So the next step was to make sure that we had you know, instructors listed, matched up with each topic, and in particular, I was looking to make sure that we had an idea of multiple instructors so that we could plan to rotate them from year to year, because both master gardeners and potentially some of the professionals might attend some of these topics more than once, you know, over a period of years. For example, master gardeners, as you can see on the second bullet point there, often choose to mentor the year after they join the program. And so just sitting through the same classes year after year can be a little bit boring. This, by having multiple instructors and rotating among them, guarantees that they get exposed to multiple perspectives and hopefully helps to maintain their interest and engagement as well. And the first bullet point there, or sub-bullet point, shows that, you know, I love our statewide specialists and including them in these programs to the extent possible, but their schedules are stretched pretty thin, and so I know not all of them can make it every year. So having a backup as well as the ability to rotate among instructors is, I think, a pretty powerful means of keeping some diversity to the information. Okay, next slide. So after we got all that lined up, my goal was to make sure that we made this as broadly known as possible. So I know I did a radio spot a time or two. I personally delivered our registration form to at least 15 different local businesses and municipalities, and also tried to, you know, via phone and email, just reach out to everyone I could think of that might have a benefit to this program. And so that was the third step. And then finally, next slide, please. You might think this shouldn't have been step 4, but rather before step 3. The State Department of Agriculture we sought recertification credits for as many topics as we could. And the only reason that this was step 4 is because this was the first year doing it. In the future, this will be a major part of the advertisement for the Hort Proficiency program, because we're able to get quite a few credits. And bottom line is, it really doesn't cost anything other than a little time to fill out the paperwork. And now that we've successfully done that for these classes, I don't expect a lot of changes from year to year. So it should be even more straightforward in the future year. So next slide. In 2018, we had 5 classes that each qualified for 3 credit hours, and so we had a total of 15 credit hours available. That happens to be 3 more credit hours than any one person could amass in a single year. The limit for applicators in Oregon is 12 credits. So, you know, should they have missed one of those courses, or if they were only paying for individual courses and, you know, didn't want all 5 of them but only wanted 4 of them, they could cherry pick which ones they wanted. So that was a pretty big deal, because for either $450 for the whole course, or for, you know, $100 if you're only paying for 4 of these courses individually, they could have all of the recertification credits they could manage for a single year. And in 2019, we're going to add entomology. The only reason it wasn't on the 2018 list is because it was the very first class, and we didn't finish the back and forth with ODA in time to get it accredited. And possibly we'll get water quality gardening and wildlife in the garden added, but the deal is, in a 3-hour class, not all of those topics are credit worthy, because anything to do with fertilizers or encouraging, you know, beneficial insects, or, well, I shouldn't say insects because that's a bad example. They might be a deterrent to using pesticides. So anyway, as you can imagine, those 2 topics have components that don't necessarily qualify for pesticide recertification credits. So if we can't get at least 2 credit hours, those wouldn't qualify. The ODA doesn't accredit anything less than 2 credit hours. Okay, next slide, please. So let's look at the numbers. In 2018, we had 25 Master Gardener volunteers. That's actually the lowest number we've had in a long time. And in 2019, one of the things that I'm going to be focusing on is trying to get that number back up. I honestly don't think we're cannibalizing from that, though, because these horticulture proficiency folks are largely people that wouldn't have otherwise been able to be in the program. So 11 horticultural proficiency folks, and then 38 individual class registrations. So that's, you know, I think if I remember the number correctly, 9 people who registered for a total of 28 individual classes. Next slide, please. Thank you. So in the horticultural proficiency segment, here's who attended at a glance. And so 3 from that other Pac-12 university, which we appreciate very much for attending, and we have a pretty good working relationship with them here in Eugene. We had a couple of municipalities, the city of Eugene and Willamette Lane Park and Recreation, and then a group called Bring Recycling, Northwest Youth Corps, and finally, we had 4 people that were either individuals who chose to pay their way through the course, or were an unknown affiliation. We didn't necessarily have a name attached to their employer. I want to talk briefly about the individuals, because in the past, people might be interested in the Master Gardener program but not want to do the volunteering. And our focus has always been the volunteer component. And so when we look at, in the past, we've even done interviews here in Lane County for potential Master Gardeners to really try and figure out who's likely to be someone who would fulfill that volunteer commitment. And the reality is that if they don't want to volunteer, we probably don't want them to volunteer. They probably are either going to fail to follow through on that commitment, or not necessarily be the best face for extension. So having an opportunity for them to get the training they want, but not put themselves in a situation to try and force that volunteer component, I think is a good thing, which I'm certainly open to any feedback you may all have from your experience as well. Next slide, please. On the individual classes, University of Oregon also had 4 additional people that attended a total of 22 classes. So I don't know why some chose to do the whole thing and some chose to do just a few classes. Maybe it was availability, I don't know, but this program gave them the flexibility to meet their needs. We had LCC, couple of folks from farm stores, and then finally, again, a couple other people that had either an unknown or affiliation or individuals. Next slide, please. All right, this is probably what some of you have been waiting for. What do the numbers look like for what did we bring in? And the answer is we more than doubled our income. With Master Gardener volunteers, we charge a tuition of $200 in Lane County, and so that brought in $5,000. And with the Horticultural Proficiency portion, we brought in an additional almost $5,000. And then we brought in another almost $1,000 on top of that from the people who chose to attend a class here or there. So looking at almost $6,000 more than the $5,000 that we brought in for just the Master Gardeners. And just bear with me, I'm reading a chat box here. All of the classes were in person, yes. We didn't do any webinars. So on the question of could that help the availability issue, absolutely. So that's certainly one thing we're considering. Do we provide a speaker fee or reimbursement for trainers? If we're asked, we might consider it, but we haven't done anything other than travel reimbursement, and not even all of them ask for that. Some of our statewide specialists, for example, consider that part of their budget, so they eat that cost. So it's on a case-by-case basis. Okay, next slide, please. So lessons learned. First of all, if you've never sought the pesticide recertification credits for this sort of thing before, keep in mind that, and I can't speak for all the departments of agriculture out there, but in Oregon, most of the presentations that people seek accreditation for are 30 or 60 minutes long, and that is within a larger venue of, probably 2 to 4, 8, or even more hours over the course of multiple days, perhaps. But when you request credits for a 3-hour presentation, that's a red flag to the ODA staff. They automatically want to know more than just a paragraph of what's going to be covered. So what we discovered is they wanted a detailed outline that included some bulleted talking points and some indication of the time planned for each of the major topics along the way. But once we put that together, we don't anticipate the core content to be changing dramatically from year to year. So we're going to be able to basically provide that outline to next year's speakers and ask them to modify it as they see fit, and then submit that without a whole lot of work on our end. Pardon me, just checking a question on the chat here. So all our classes are offered Wednesdays from 9 a.m. till noon and 1 p.m. to 4 p.m. So that has been kind of the tradition in Lane County for as long as I can remember. We have tried evening classes, we've tried weekend classes, and one of the things that we found is that, when the economy was down in 2010 or so, we seemed to be doing pretty well there, but as the economy picked up, people just weren't attending the evening classes like they had been. So we discontinued that a couple years back, and with classes held outside of the weekday, oftentimes the people that we get in those classes are people who don't have the ability to volunteer very much with the normal venues. So it's been a challenge for them to complete volunteer commitments. So there's pros and cons with all of these options, and they're all definitely things to consider. And that's one of the benefits of extension and county by county basis for which we have these designed. Every county's needs are different, and we certainly continue to explore how we can reach the broadest audience in our county without alienating people unintentionally. Next slide, please. So one of the things that I tried to key on early was we had a mixed audience, and I wanted to make sure that we were always making them both feel welcome, that we weren't simply making everything about the Master Gardener volunteers and alienating this group that we brought in, or on the flip side, throwing so much information at the professionals that we're making the Master Gardeners feel like it's no longer their class. So just something to think about if you do this sort of option. Make sure that you introduce the groups to one another so that they understand where one another are coming from the very beginning on day one. And when you're making announcements, make it clear who in the audience those announcements pertain to or don't pertain to. Not a bad idea to make sure instructors understand that as well, because the typical class that most of them are used to is just Master Gardener volunteers. So good idea to help them to understand who they're going to be talking to. And then with any printed materials, kind of reiterating that same message that if you're going to print schedules, for example, on both the introduction on the morning of day one in our program and then the field trip on the end of the last day, those are optional for our horticultural proficiency folks, but they are certainly welcome to attend. And I don't know that we necessarily got that message out early enough that they're welcome to join us. So I think next year that's one thing I'll be doing a better job of, is making sure they're aware of that option from day one. And next slide, please. I think that's the last slide. And so my goal in 2019 is to absolutely advertise the Master Gardener program more. Going back to the chat box, if there are opportunities to look at some online training or other options that might help to increase those numbers, we'll pursue that. Now, I should mention that we do have an online training option statewide that's available to anyone who wants to sign up, and then they can come into the program at the county level after they've completed that. So I shouldn't say that it wasn't an option in 2018. It's just not something we were coordinating directly out of my office this last year. I will absolutely be advertising those pesticide recertification credits, because now that we know we have them, some of those same people that attended in the past could attend next year, not only for a relatively inexpensive cost of recertification credits, but my goal is to provide different instructors from year to year, so they'll hear some different messages. And something that's come up in discussion over the last few months in Oregon was there are some counties where, just because they don't have a major population, maybe there are very few opportunities for pesticide recertification credits without having to travel to larger communities for that training. So if smaller counties can make the Master Gardener training available to other audiences with the opportunity to provide recertification credits, that could be a win-win in terms of bringing in funding as well as providing a service that previously may not have existed. So this last concept is one that I've probably given more thought to than anything else in the last few weeks or months, and that is, I would like to get the cost of the horticultural proficiency option in line with the upfront cost of the Master Gardener volunteer option. And so the numbers here reflect what I mean by that. Currently, our Master Gardeners are asked to pay a $200 non-refundable tuition, which is the cost to help cover costs of the course. And then they also pay a $150 refundable deposit, which they get back if and when they complete their volunteer commitment. So the total upfront out-of-pocket cost is $350, and I should say that's actually more like $380, because there's the cost of a Master Gardener handbook in there as well, but I chose to leave that out of these numbers. The Hort Proficiency program basically was $25 per class and 20 classes, so that would have been $500, but we gave them a $50 discount if they signed up for all of them as a little bit of an incentive. So it comes in $100 more expensive than the Master Gardener option. And so the story I'm trying to tell here is that there is a small incentive for people who want to try and save $100 to say they want to volunteer when some of them really don't want to. And so if we can maybe bring the Hort Proficiency down to $350 this next year, then people can truly choose between, yes, I want to be a volunteer, or no, I really don't. Maybe that's a good thing because people are more honest with us up front, or maybe it's a bad thing because people might choose to go Hort Proficiency instead. But here's the deal, we'd still have that refundable deposit within the Master Gardener side. So all they have to do to get $150 back in their pocket is to complete that volunteer commitment. And my experience here in Lane County has been that is a pretty powerful incentive. So that's kind of where I see us going in 2019. With that, I think the next slide is asking for questions. So whether we do this verbally or via the chat box. Okay, so I see one person saying, how complicated is it to return a deposit through OSU? We have a special account set up, and I would have to do some research on the details of that account, but it has worked very well once we figured out how to do that. And I would be happy to get more information on that and then share that via Nicole could send it out via email perhaps. but I know that would be kind of OSU specific, so it may not be that helpful to everyone across the nation. But certainly it's worked out for us. I've heard that before that account was set up, though, it was more difficult. How long have you done the deposit for EMG program, and do you feel it limits? Any cost is going to limit the program, absolutely. I don't know what year they started doing the deposit, but it's been a number of years ago. We in Oregon really started facing economic issues in the late 2000s, 2008, 10, somewhere in there. And so that's where the monetary thing started to change. When I went through in 1998, I cannot remember for certain if I actually had to pay a tuition of any sort at all, but I do think that whatever we can do to lower the tuition and lower that economic barrier, the more participants we'll have. So that's another piece of the puzzle that we're looking at, is if we can bring the cost of both Hort Proficiency and Master Gardener volunteers down, but yet not sacrifice our need to help cover some program costs, then we'd be better off for sure. So let's see here. When you provide certification, we don't have any type of a training number for certification. It's just a certificate of completion, basically. So nothing more formal than that. And I see here, do we have a scholarship or economic hardship application? Yes, our Master Gardener chapter here in Lane County has chosen to offer scholarships, and so they help cover the cost for anyone who applies. And there's pros and cons to that. It's a frustrating thing, but I've been in communication with them closely on this over the last few months as well. And historically, what we found is the people who come through the program on a scholarship have a very low likelihood, statistically, of completing their volunteer commitment. And that's frustrating. We want to make it available to them. We have the Seed to Supper program, and that program is available to low-income folks. And we kind of are starting to think that maybe steering folks toward that program may be a better option, because it doesn't require the volunteerism. And there's a number of reasons for that. I actually had a great conversation with my supervisor a month or so ago about this. If someone has economically challenged enough to not be able to pay some sort of entry-level cost, they might also have other conditions that make volunteerism difficult. Lack of transportation, or the need to jump at an opportunity to take a part-time job if it comes up, or any job if it comes up. So there might be some reasons that explain that. And knowing that programs like Seed to Supper exist, that might be an opportunity for those folks to get the training they want without having to take on a burdensome commitment that may not be conducive to their situation at the time. Looking for other questions? Feel free to type them on out here.
Jeff, this is Nicole Pinson. I like your idea, because here in Hillsborough County in Florida, this past Master Gardener class, I noticed that I was getting a lot of people interviewing for the Master Gardener program that had just moved to Florida, and they were homeowners that really wanted the information. They didn't want to volunteer. So from those discussions, we decided that it would be beneficial to offer a kind of a brief version of the Master Gardener class with no volunteer component. We fleshed out that we thought evening classes from 6 to 8 p.m. on Tuesdays during the week would be the best. And then we also thought about classes that could integrate possibly our teaching and demonstration gardens. So pruning was a topic that came up a lot from participants, that they wanted to learn how to take care of their plants and prune, and maybe do some hands-on activities in our garden. So my question is that I noticed that you selected a few different topics to teach first. And if I go back, I think you had plant pathology, plant problem diagnosis, IPM, pesticides, and weeds. How did you come up with those classes? And does anyone listening to the call have suggestions for other classes that may be appropriate?
Thank you for the question. So I will say that plant pathology and plant problem diagnosis, it was not our goal to have it as early as we did. We looked at entomology, botany, certain courses, soils in particular. Those were core classes that were so fundamental. We wanted those to get out first. Soils we had to push back a little bit because the instructor was out of town and was not back in time. And then, as I mentioned earlier, plant pathology and plant problem diagnosis, when we found out that the instructor was willing and able to do a full day of classes, we sort of rearranged things to accommodate that. And so we just wanted all those topics that were so fundamental to be done first, because when we get into something like lawns, for example, or orchards or berries, they're really more applied, where we have you know, bits and pieces of all these other things. So if we can reinforce topics they've heard earlier, then we don't need to introduce them for the first time and spend so much time on them. I love to talk in berry classes about, you know, they pretty much all need the same thing: good drainage and full sun. So if we don't need to talk about what constitutes good drainage, then we can move on. But you know, the soils class would help get that out of the way early on. So that's kind of how we chose them. And again, we had to rearrange a little bit, but in 2019, my goal is to push plant pathology and plant problem diagnosis back a little bit further in the schedule and bring soils up a little bit. You know, botany is probably what we'll lead off with. And I will say this, not that it's really pertinent to what we're discussing now, but I am going to shorten botany to one day, but then replace the second day with plant ID, which is so fundamental to, you know, half the people that walk into our plant clinic. What's wrong with this? Well, what is it? Well, I don't know. And we spend all our time figuring out what it is before we know what's wrong with it. So going back to the chat box here, I'm going to make sure I didn't skip over anything. We actually have quite a few questions. So if you need to cut me off, do so, but I'll start chipping away at these.
We have plenty
Maximum
of
class
time.
size that you want. Okay, thank you. The maximum class size that we would want, I'll tell you this, I would love it if we had to find a bigger facility. I will never turn anyone away for space if I can help it. If they have a, you know, now if it becomes unwieldy, I guess that's different, but we used to have a different facility, and we had a room where we could easily fit about 50 participants plus the mentors and instructors and whatnot. We haven't been space limited here for a while, so I look forward to that day. What qualities are you looking for in Hort Proficiency? You know, we don't really have any prerequisites there. I mean, if they are willing to pay the cost and they're not going to be disruptive to the class, I'm happy to let them come in and hopefully they feel like they earn their money's worth by attending. Did we turn anyone away that applied for Hort Proficiency? No. But we did turn away a couple of folks that applied for the Master Gardener Volunteer because, for example, we had a husband and wife that applied. It was very clear she wanted to volunteer, and it was very clear he did not want to. We turned him down. She chose not to join as well, and you know, that's our loss on her side. But I don't really want people in the course if they don't want to be there for one reason or another. Perhaps, you know, if maybe we could have done a better job of extending the opportunity for him to pay for the Hort Proficiency option. I think we did, but I think that, you know, they kind of wanted to attend and volunteer together, so it just didn't work out. But bottom line, we don't make a habit of turning people away if we can help it. Is there a mechanism for people who complete the certificate to become Master Gardener Volunteer later on? Yes, actually, we had 12 Hort Proficiency folks that originally applied, and one of them chose to become a Master Gardener. So as soon as he completes his volunteer commitment, assuming he does, I will refund his money, you know, to the point of, back to the point of the $200 tuition. So if he paid $450, he'll get $250 back if he completes the commitment. I want to make this as seamless and easy. You know, it's not about paperwork and procedures and red tape. If they want to be a volunteer, the last thing I'm going to do is discourage that. And many new to Oregon people appreciate our sustainable landscaping module in the online MG course. Also info on local ornamental plants and vegetable growing. That's a good point. And we have I'll avoid going off on too big of a tangent here, but in Lane County, we've been famous for our specialist groups. We have sustainable landscape specialists, we have pruning specialists, we have tree fruit specialists, plant problem diagnosis specialists. It's a long list of specialty topics within the program, and so sustainable landscape is one of them. But certainly, yeah, when it comes to new people to the state, whether it's Florida or Oregon or elsewhere, anything that we can do to help give them some local information quickly and easily without necessarily a 3-month-long commitment would be helpful. So that might be a standalone class that we might offer annually for folks new to the area. Just a comment on scholarships here. So someone with some experience, pardon me, I'm paraphrasing, less than desirable volunteer time back. I agree, we've seen the exact same thing. So, I don't think that seems to be state dependent. It seems to be true in Virginia as well as Oregon and probably elsewhere. There's got to be a reason for that. And I think to some extent it's that buy-in, that commitment. If you're not committed to paying some break even, there's a balance with these numbers. If you push the numbers too high, then participation goes down. And if you push the numbers too low, maybe the commitment's not there. So I think there's a sweet spot, and perhaps we can hone in on it, but that takes some time and tweaking the system a little bit. But my goal in 2019 is really to try to make sure that we don't have people trying to get in on the volunteer ticket when really they don't want to volunteer. And if we can do that and possibly lower the barrier of tuition at the same time, maybe we can start to hone in on that sweet spot a little bit. Do we do pre and post surveys? Type of demographic questions have you found useful? So we do a post survey, we don't do a pre-survey. I mean, we have the application itself, which I guess is a form of survey, but we do a post survey, and I did not prepare the responses for this presentation, but as far as demographic questions that we've found helpful, off the top of my head, I can't think of any that have really proven to be the silver bullet, but I'd be happy to share that if you want to send me a direct email. And yeah, I can provide Nicole with a link to our program, absolutely. And she can send that out to everyone. Oh, sorry, I need to scroll down. More messages.
These are great
scholarships.
Questions.
Yes, they are. Once we started only partial scholarships, we had much improved completion rates. That's a good point. Full scholarships may be detrimental. So again, there's that, if I pay something out of my own pocket, I feel like I want to get some value out of it. But if I spend someone else's money, then it doesn't really bother me if I don't complete the commitment. Partial scholarships, higher completion. I like this theme. Let's see, statewide program that approved by the state coordinator or currently this is a Lane County program, and I'm on a committee known as the I'll get it right eventually, Community Horticulture Advisory Panel, CHAP for short. I'm a good old CHAP. And so several other folks throughout the Oregon extension system that work with the Master Gardener program are part of this committee, and we review a topic each year in depth. And one of them has been, the engagement, the accessibility, we've contended with that piece a little bit this year. And so I've been sharing these practices with others across the state, hoping that we can look for ways to, not only reach out to master gardeners, but also to broaden the audience. Because keep in mind, I saw, well, I guess, Nicole, you mentioned that you were looking at Tuesday evenings from 6 to 8 p.m. And that was similar to what we used to do with the Master Gardener at Night program, which started out as a, shall I say, watered down version of the full Master Gardener program. It wasn't as in-depth, it wasn't as long, and we eventually morphed it into something that was more commensurate with the Master Gardener program. But bottom line was, then you had 2 different venues and 2 different sets of instructors to line up, and it became a lot more work. My goal here with this program has really been, how can we take advantage of the fact that we have these great topics, and we're bringing top-notch instructors from all over the state. How can we capitalize on that to not only take full advantage of it, but also to, maybe increase our funding, but also reach a broader audience. And in particular, I've always been a little concerned about the underserved groups. Having worked in retail sales, and I was the training manager at that company there for for over a decade. And my experience as a training manager coming into that program was retail salespeople largely get their information from their vendors, and vendors are just salespeople. And so, there were a couple vendors that did a fantastic job of really sharing good information. I can't say that horticultural topics fell into that category. It was all about how do we talk bad about our competition and really push our brand name. And so I really have a lot of respect for getting science-based, research-based information to the people who previously weren't aware of it. And so I was pleased to hear that, or to be able to provide that through the extension service, as opposed to just being on the end of one company. Looking at another question here, do you end up spending a lot more time on the classes because of the added proficiency program? No, we had pretty much zero time. I mean, other than making a separate application form at the beginning of the year and making sure our announcements are, tailored to the audience, and the only thing that really takes any more time is to just pass around the sign-in sheets for the pesticide credits on those handful of classes. So really, it's very, very little more time spent on my end. And here we reached 11 folks for the whole course, plus those 38 individual registrations for individual classes. To me, those numbers are pretty good. And very little effort on our part, other than just making a concerted effort in 2018 to push that program. But I don't feel I need to push it as much moving forward. I did literally we have 2 Home Depots and a Lowe's locally, and then of course many other smaller companies. I went to all of those locally, and Lowe's was not hesitant to inform me that they have all the horticultural training they could possibly need, so they don't need any more. And that's fine, but we're here if they need us, whether they want to call us to answer a question, or whether they want to participate in our program. We're here to serve them just as well as anyone else. But very, very little. So next question, types of advertising we're doing for the new program. Last year, I made it very much a personal delivery of that information, because I didn't want to send something in the mail and have it land on someone's desk and eventually in the recycle bin. So I hand delivered it. I'd walk into these stores, I would ask to talk to a manager, and I would share the information briefly. I could quickly read whether they were receptive or not, and most were receptive. That doesn't mean they all sent someone, but it means they were aware of it. And I made that personal connection and reminded them that we're here for them as a resource, whether they needed to, wanted to send someone to this program or not. I helped to establish that connection with Extension. For folks that I knew, I was willing and able to send some emails and get it to folks that way without having to make that personal trek across town. And then folks that we weren't able to connect with directly, I'd send some information in the mail. But bottom line is we really targeted the groups that we thought would benefit, and since then have taken every opportunity to try and share this information with anyone that it seems would benefit. Pest control operators, there's so many of them. I can't begin to really know that we've connected with all of them, but I've definitely connected with some of them, and some of them sent some folks to this program. Pardon me, I have another question here. So the question is about engagement. I would not say that anyone was necessarily more or less engaged. There were, again, the introductory class on the morning of day 1 was optional for the Hort Proficiency folks, and it was more about the Master Gardener volunteering and a little bit about interacting with clients and what to expect, asking open-ended questions and all that kind of stuff. So they were a little less engaged, the handful that attended there, but not all of them. I mean, some of them were eating that information up as well. There are definitely some topics that don't pertain as much to retail. For example, my background, I guess I didn't really share this earlier, but my bachelor's is chemistry and my master's is soil science. And with the degree in soil science, I love to talk about soils, but I could never justify delivering a soils class when I was working in a home improvement store, because even though, as you all know, there's many topics in soils that are very relevant to retail, you have to really make that direct connection, or the audience doesn't care about permeability and porosity and texture and structure. They just want to know the take-home message, which is which product should I sell my customer? And we don't sell soil. In fact, that's despite the fact that those bags say soil on them, many of them, they aren't soil. So we have to talk about how organic matter interacts with the soil. We have to make it more directed toward products. And so anyway, there are some classes where individuals from these different backgrounds may not relate to the whole class as well, but overall, they really enjoyed the information. They felt like they got something out of all the topics, even though maybe it was more or less for any given topic. Have we recruited any instructors from a professional, retail, corporate background? Well, I guess myself to start with. No, we really haven't. It was almost exclusively extension, and the one that wasn't extension was DEQ for the water quality gardening, and they have a really good presentation on talking about things like nitrates and pesticide leaching and all that stuff. So no, we haven't. Maybe that's an opportunity. I haven't given that much thought, so I really appreciate that question, because haven't really had a chance to think about how we might be able to make that work. But it is a good possibility that might help engage some of the different audience, or provide some different perspective. I actually, you may recall, we had two folks from Wilco Farm Stores present in our training, at least for select classes, and I actually reached out to them to see if this was something that was of interest to them, and they informed me that they have sort of a corporate university thing for their horticulture program, and it's possible that I might be working with them to participate in their university, but not sure to what extent they might want to send folks to our region. We're just one county, so if every county had this program, then Wilco might be able to make use of it, but they are mostly north of Lane County. They do have a store in Lane County, but most of their activity is up north. So, there's options for other counties. So Lynn County, Marion County, did you hear that? Oh, I don't know if you're on there or not, but just throwing a bone out there. Well, gosh, that's the first time I've paused and not seen a new question. Are we nearing the end, or do you have more questions for me?
Jeff, I was just curious if you send class materials out ahead of time, or do you think you may consider a hybrid class, or do you prefer the face-to-face format for this audience?
As much as I hate to impose my own personal likes and dislikes, I have always been in favor of face-to-face classroom instruction, and my reason for that is the opportunity. We're working hard. Part of that CHAP program I mentioned earlier, we're working hard to try and incorporate some hands-on activities, which just are not going to work online. I mean, maybe there's some opportunities to suggest some activities that people do on their own, but the activities that people bring in and the ability to hear what other people are asking, to learn from other people's experiences by networking, and to be able to ask questions of the instructor, I just feel like it's really hard to replicate that, or I think there's a lot of opportunity with the online training to supplement what we're doing, but I don't see it as being a substitute in most cases. But times are changing. What people want may dictate more what I want to provide. So I'm open-minded, even though I have my opinions. I'm not hesitant to share what I think, but I'm also willing to listen to what others have to say and to change course accordingly.
Thank you. So do we have any other questions for Jeff about his training course? Okay. All right.
Well, thank you all for participating. I really appreciate your questions. And really, before we close this down, Nicole, I just have a question for you. Am I able to get copies of this chat string?
Yes, I'll save the chat file.
Excellent. Thank you.
Okay. And then for everyone that's on the call, we're going to record the session and post it on our YouTube channel, and we're posting the past webinars. And so that's here, but you don't have to scribble that down because I'll send you the link. I just wanted to let you know that it's there. And then I did receive a couple of messages, private messages from folks that are looking to sign on to the EMG Coordinator listserv. And there's 2 steps to join on the eExtension website, and I'll go through that with you guys after the webinar. Okay, any other questions before we end the webinar today? I really appreciate everyone listening in today. Thank you for your feedback. This was great discussion. Jeff, you did a great job, and I think you gave us all great ideas to think about. And many of the things that you've had challenges with, we've seen in our programs as well. So I appreciate your feedback and teaching us about your process.
Thank you. Appreciate it, the opportunity.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your week.